Hi, I'm James Milan, and this is Talk of the Town. One of the things I like most about this series is the variety of people we get to talk to and the variety of places that we get to visit here in Arlington. So today we are at Whittemore Park in front of the Dallin Museum in Arlington Center, and we get to talk to Arlington's tree warden, Tim Lecuivre. And Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Great to be here.
We love to introduce folks who are new to their positions in town, but we're catching you a little late because I know you've been at the job for a little while.
Right, yeah, just about a year. I came on board last May, mid-May or so.
All right, and what were you doing before that?
I worked as a Massachusetts certified arborist in the private tree care industry.
Okay, so you moved from private to here,
Exactly.
public municipal.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's fruit for another conversation at some point.
Sure.
But I noticed that, we asked you where you'd like to meet us, and you chose this spot. So I was wondering if you'd explain why.
I grew up here in Arlington, and I think it's amazing that they were actually able to move this house from down by Jimmy's Stairhouse
You remember
over
right,
this way.
of
So just in that perspective, I thought it would be really cool to come here because this is just a perfect urban environment. So we're going to be talking about our urban forest, and this is a nice little spot where we have some urban setting in the background with concrete and buildings and structures and moving parts with also our living canopy over our heads. So I thought this would be a good spot to come, and it's a controlled environment. We're not out in the street, dodging cows.
That's, again, for another interview at another time when we're feeling more adventurous. So people have heard now that your title is tree warden.
Right.
They may or may not understand exactly what that means. So what does the Arlington's tree warden do?
So a tree warden is one that governs public trees. So about 1890s, Massachusetts decided to have a position to govern public trees so they just wouldn't be continuing just to be cut down regardless of the situation. So they came up with an idea to have a tree warden, someone that's responsible for town, city trees, and that was installed, like I said, in the 1890s, and every town in Massachusetts has a tree warden, and so that's the position in general.
Okay, so you just said that basically your responsibility then is public trees. So I think maybe we better figure out, or we better clarify exactly what public trees mean.
Sure. So public trees are any trees that belong to the city or town. So for instance, my role, majority, is looking after, taking care of the trees in the public right-of-way. That's that green strip of land between the street and the sidewalk. So that's majority of the trees that I look at. Obviously, there's other trees in sections of towns, where it could be a park, schools, playgrounds, and under the parks, that's those trees have jurisdiction by the Parks Commissioner. But the Parks Commissioner will reach out to me, bring me in, and we can work together and figure out what we can and what we can't do to a tree.
Okay, but for somebody then who is concerned about or has questions about trees that they see in a park here in Arlington, you're not the first person that they should be going
They
to.
should reach out to the Parks Commissioner, and they can come, they could look at the tree, and if they need to reach out to me, I'm more than happy and willing and available to collaborate and figure out what we can and can't do.
Okay, and you had mentioned that I think everybody's familiar with, public trees being in that strip between, as you said, the sidewalk and the street.
Right.
I think that probably makes intuitive sense to a lot of people. There are neighborhoods in town, I know, where there are no sidewalks.
Exactly.
What happens there?
So that gets a little dicey. Obviously, it's really easy when you come up to a street, you see that strip, it's easy peasy, ready to go. But like you mentioned, there are sections where there aren't sidewalks, so therefore, I work with the engineering department, and they can come out and measure. They can try to look at plot plans, they can look at lot lines, and get close. It's not a certified layout from a certified surveyor. That's usually the best thing to do, but we can at least get close, and we can figure out, let's say there could be a setback about maybe 3 or 4 feet, that's public land. We can take measurements and figure out who owns that tree. If it's really dicey, we can't figure it out, the best thing that I would recommend residents to do is to actually have their land surveyed by a certified land surveyor. We could figure out who owns the tree.
Okay. And so before we dig into some of the more of the details of your job, I was wondering if there, in broad strokes, is there anything that your job encompasses that we haven't mentioned so far?
Sure. So many pest insects that are sweeping through Massachusetts steadily. As the global market shrinks, we get each other's problems. So longitude, latitude, we share the same environment as many of our friends across the ocean and Asia and such. So their goods come here, our goods go there.
Globalization,
exactly,
right?
And it's
happens on the tree level as well.
fantastic to have that, you know, communication and those goods and those sales to be made. But we get each other's pest problems. So we have many invasive pests coming into Arlington. For instance, cankerworm, winter moth, gypsy moth, Asian longhorn beetle. So we have different pest insects that we have to be mindful of.
And I would assume that is an intersection for the public and you, the tree warden, quite often. In other words, people will notice a tree either right around them or as they're passing some area, and it just doesn't look well.
Exactly.
And they're concerned.
Exactly. So many people are outside and make many calls. This caterpillar's eating my tree. The first thing I ask them is, where is the tree? And they say, well, it's in my backyard or it's right next to my house. And I just tell them, unfortunately, there's nothing really I can do about that because I just can't do anything about trees on private land. But I usually give them some contact information about Massachusetts certified arborists where they can get some information to go ahead and treat their trees, have a certified arborist come out and do a plant healthcare evaluation and figure out what different treatments are available.
Yeah, I think that must be somewhat reassuring to people to hear that you can at least put them in touch with the people who can maybe help them. Because really one of the points of this conversation, and I think one of the things that we just need to make as clear as possible, is what you can do and what you can't do with your job,
right. We don't treat trees in Arlington, public street trees. We just don't have the resources to do that. And it would be pretty much, impossible to contact people, have things move. People are sensitive about pesticides, other people aren't. So there's a lot of checks and balances. So it's just something that we're not doing in Arlington as of right now.
Right, and it makes sense that there are some things that you just don't want to get involved in because it's not going to be easily resolved or work out very well, et cetera.
Exactly.
Just make the lines fuzzier. All right, so let's assume that somebody does appropriately call you about a tree that they're concerned about on public land or something like that, or just something they notice. What happens from there?
Okay, so basically what happens is that people can reach out to me. They can either call me in my office, they can email me directly, but what we would prefer is that they would go to the Arlington website, into the Q&A section under the trees section. There they can fill out a tree evaluation form and send it to me, and it comes up on my computer. So I come up, I look at my computer, there's a question or a concern about a tree, therefore I'll take the information down, I'll write out to the site, look at the tree, do an evaluation. After the evaluation's done, I'll respond to the resident, let them know what we can and can't do, and then that information will go off to the forestry department. In the forestry department, they'll prioritize that information and send the crew out to help the residents.
So is the forestry department a state agency, or is that also within the town?
It's a town. The forestry department, they're out of the DPW.
Okay.
So we have a crew that's in-house that takes care of our general tree care work. They wear many hats, so not only are they involved with the tree care, they're also involved with other things with the holiday decorations. Folks in town may see them hang up banners or holiday lights. Also, they are responsible for help clearing the roads, plowing, salt, sanding. So sometimes it can be a little difficult to get out there to take care of a tree-related issue because we have a storm event, and streets need to be plowed, they need to be sanded, they need to be salted, and they do their best to run around and try to take care of all those storm-related emergencies. Limbs come down, trees tip over, they're busy clearing those roads, and then we can kind of get back to our regular scheduled maintenance, so to speak.
Yeah, listening to you explain that it kind of reminds me of the fact that when storm events happen, I think people are hyper aware of the fact that the trees are sharing space a lot of the time with lines of different sorts, from cable companies or Eversource, et cetera. How does that intersect with your job?
Sure. So if it's a tree that has interfering with their house drop, that's the line going into their house, or the computer line, or their phone lines, those are things that we can help out with the residents. And the secondary lines, so when you're out in the street and you look at lines on a telephone pole, the very top line, that's the primary. Eversource is responsible to take care of the pruning and the maintenance of that area.
Okay.
Underneath that, there's usually a section of a bunch of thicker, broader lines. Those are secondary lines, and those are things that we can help out residents. So one company has jurisdiction over one, and we have jurisdiction over another. So I work with Eversource to do the best that we can with the pruning. You know, you can see these old maples that have been planted years ago, and the specs, is 15 feet right, 15 feet left, 20 feet overhead. After you do that, there's really not much left of the canopy.
Yeah.
So we're working with Eversource to come in compliance with our pruning standards, something that if there's a large piece of wood and there's some smaller branches headed towards those lines, perhaps leave the larger piece and just remove the smaller vegetation. We'd rather have them come back than to completely remove that piece. Now the tree is compromised. You see these trees with that wide shape, and now it's structurally just not sound. So every time there's an event, they can just slowly but surely fall apart. So I'm working with Eversource to comply with our standards and just make the trees more structurally sound and more aesthetically pleasing as well.
Yeah, it's great if you can get both. Right?
Exactly, right.
So I know that Arlington has a very active tree committee, and I'm wondering what is the nature of the relationship that you have with the tree committee, and are there projects in the work that people should know about?
Sure. So I meet with the tree committee once a month. They're a volunteer group. They're fantastic, and they're passionate about trees and passionate about helping people with tree-related problems. So one thing that in town that we're working on is completing a street tree inventory. So we are working with our tree committee and volunteers to go out and actually inventory all of our street trees. It's really simple. You could take their smartphone with an app, Open Tree Map. They can walk up to a tree, actually press on their smartphone where they are. A little decal will come up on their phone, and they can type in what type of tree it is, measure the tree, and the overall health. We just use good, fair, or poor. Majority of our trees are usually around that fair condition. Some are good, some are poor. So they add all of that into the system, and we're hoping to have that inventory completed this year. Then once we have all that information, we'll be able to inlay that into our own GIS system. So it'll be used as a management tool. So we'll know what we have, what we don't have, the conditions of the trees, and then we can manage from there. So instead of just on a request of something happening, we can be a little bit more proactive and get ahead of any tree-related issues.
Right. So by the time that project is done, I can see for sure that it would be very useful to have an accurate inventory of all of the trees in public space. It does seem like a labor-intensive kind of undertaking.
Sure.
So if people are interested in volunteering to do this, I assume they can get trained?
Yeah, exactly. So they can reach out to our tree committee, either directly or through a Google group. And our volunteers in our tree committee will be happy to instruct anybody on how to do this process about actually inventorying the trees. It's really simple. It's really easy. It takes 5-10 minutes about going over it, and it's a lot of fun. And it's good exercise. And you get out and you get to see, maybe some neighbors or some people that you know, maybe some people that you don't know. And it's really a way to volunteer, get out, help the community, and help us reforest Arlington. Also, with that inventory, it's going to help us know where we're low on our tree canopy, so it'll help us reforest Arlington. So there's many different avenues that can be done with this inventory once it's done.
So on another topic, we're here, the calendar says it's spring, you're in multi-layers, I'm in multi-layers, it's New England spring,
you
right?
got it.
But looking around at the trees, obviously they've yet to bud.
Sure.
But that will be happening soon. I'm wondering, as we transition from one season to another, is there anything that changes about your own work because of the season?
Sure. As of right now, things are fairly quiet right now. We're getting out of the winter, so we're getting caught up with our storm-related emergency work. But the trees will be leafing out, and as we speak right now, there's actually winter moth that it's hatching. So I'm sure a lot of folks have seen around fall time. They've seen the moths flying around their vehicles, maybe by their door, maybe by the front door, the entranceway. So what happens is once they see those moths flying around, those are the male moths. The male moths have wings, they fly. The females, they don't have wings, they do not fly. So when they see all that activity, the moths are ready to mate. The female crawls up to the top of the tree. She lays her eggs by the bud. So right about now, this time of year, they hatch.
Okay.
They go into the bud. So that's happening now. So as the leaves expand, they're already being eaten, and eventually they'll become defoliated. So as soon as things start to leaf out, it'll be happening quick, and I'm sure I'll get many calls on some of our invasive pests.
Yeah. So is it too late at that point to save a particular tree or something
Sure.
like that? And it's just that gives you notice that this is happening in an area. What happens in that case?
So there's two things. So number one, once the leaves leaf out, we can actually see what we have. We can see how bad the population is as far as defoliation goes. So there's a couple things that can be done. There could be a topical spray. Residents could reach out to a Massachusetts certified arborist. They could have their trees sprayed either topically or also with a systemic that goes into the soil, or actually a systemic goes into the trunk. So there's different ways to treat the insect and different chemicals or pesticides that could be used. Some are a little bit harsh chemicals, some are a little bit softer chemicals. It all depends on your preference and how you feel about the environment, how you feel about pesticides.
So what if you get a call and there's a tree and it can't be saved?
Sure.
You have to cut it down. What happens from there? Do you have the option of replanting it right there?
Yes, exactly. So what happens is I'll go out to the site, look at the tree. Obviously, if the tree is compromised and it's just structurally not sound and it's not safe, we'll remove that tree. And the tree is removed on a kind of like a three-tiered basis. So the crew will come out, they'll remove the top canopy of the tree, typically leaving the stump. If you drive around town, you see stumps. The crew will come back and remove that stump, and then the third, they'll come back and grind the stump. So they do that because we have a small crew in town keeping up with many different things. So that's why it's a three-stage process. Removing the crown, removing the trunk, then coming back and grinding that stump below grade. And then if we can replant, we can, and we will at that spot. It may not be necessarily exactly on that spot because there will be some of that trunk material underneath the ground, but we try to get it as close as we can. And then I'll make a determination of what type of tree we can replant. And it's typically, we have three types of tree sizes. We have a large tree size, a medium tree size, and a small tree size. If there's a big wide open area, we can put in a nice large tree, perfect. If they're overhead utilities, we'll plant a small tree, typically getting about 30 feet or so. And then after that, we have medium-sized trees that we can sprinkle in between. So we're trying to get away from that practice of putting these big monster trees underneath the utility lines, getting back into that harsh pruning cycle. So it's really about the correct tree species and size species, because we have to be mindful of the overhead utilities, underground utilities, and the actual planting spot itself. Keeping mindful that we have to also keep up with the ADA compliance, came up with the American Disabilities Act, and so we have to be mindful of all of these things as we replant.
Yeah, and that's really, in a nutshell, like a good description of your challenge, right? As a tree warden in a town like Arlington, where really you are dealing with a lot of infrastructure, kind of urban infrastructure that you have to take into account.
Exactly. The urban forest, it's not perfect. There's many challenges, but we try to do the best we can with what we have, and we try to do our best, and just to try to preserve our canopy as we have it now, and then also reforesting Arlington as well, keeping mindful of all these other challenges that we are facing as well.
Okay. So one of the things that I've noticed, that people around Arlington notice, of course, is that when new trees are being planted, especially on the side of a road, it's, they're going into these kind of boxes, I guess.
Exactly, yeah.
And I understand that can really limit a tree's lifespan. Is
Sure,
that right?
it sure can. So in the industry, we refer to that as like a coffin pit or a tree coffin pit. Typically, it's a small parcel.
Doesn't sound very promising.
No. Typically, it's a small parcel of land, usually like 3x3 or 4x4 square. Trees are planted in. They do well for a few years, and then eventually they start to decline. And the reason being is that once the tree outgrows that space, a lot of that nutrients is depleted from the soil.
So a tree is using the nutrients in the soil, obviously,
Exactly.
in order to grow.
Exactly.
And so those nutrients are not necessarily being replenished in that situation?
Exactly, because typically in the forest, everything falls from the tree. You know, leaves, seed pods, nuts, and so forth, and that creates nutrients. We come along and we tidy up, we rake, we blow, we keep it, you know, so there's not a trip hazard. But eventually, once we keep doing that, the tree can't naturally replenish itself because we're removing all that organic matter. So eventually, that soil will become depleted, and that soil will just basically come to dirt, and then eventually the tree will start to decline.
Okay, so if people see that happening, it's a natural thing given the
Exactly. So
circumstances.
typically what happens is that large cities, they'll just kind of swap out those trees, whatever it is. Could be 11 years, could be 15 years, or maybe it could be, you know, maybe 7 years. Every tree is a little bit different, and every piece of land is a little bit different as well.
Wow, so much to keep track of,
You
really.
got it, yeah.
All right, so let's go and let's just wander over here and let you tell us about one of the trees in the park here.
Sure. So one of the questions that I get quite a bit is somebody will call me and they'll say, my tree's diseased. So I come out and I take a look and they say, look at all this going on here. So this is actually a yellowwood. That's the name of this tree. You can tell it's a yellowwood, has this nice smooth gray bark. And this here is lichen. Lichen, and then also you can see some of this moss. Typically you'll see this out in the forest on the north side of the tree. It's typically furthest from the sun, and it doesn't get enough sunlight, so you'll see this growing on. I suspect that this tree has this because there's probably irrigation. The irrigation comes up, it moves back and forth, it hits the tree stays wet, and this moss and the lichen grows on the tree. It's not a disease, it doesn't hurt the tree, it just kind of grows, and some people like the look of it, some people don't. So it's not to worry, it's just a symbiotic relationship. It's just there, and that's just part of, it's just part of being a tree.
Very important for people to understand that's not bad. The
Exactly.
tree doesn't mind.
No, it's not bad. And then also there are exfoliating trees. Some residents will reach out to me and the bark is peeling off, and it could just be the characteristic of the tree. White birch trees have that exfoliating bark, bark maples, and then also trees along Memorial Drive, those big old London plane trees, almost looks like a camouflage type of, that's just exfoliating. It exfoliates, and that's just part of the plant, and it's just a really cool characteristic of those specific tree species.
Mm-hmm. And what else can you tell us about, like, how old is this tree? Can you look at a tree and kind of assess that, or?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Every tree is a little different. It all depends on how much light it's getting, how much nutrients it's getting. But something like this, I mean, I would probably guess that's probably somewhere around maybe like 30 years old or so in general. So if a resident called me to come out to look at their tree, and we could use this as an example. So the first thing that I would do is I would just kind of stand back and look at the tree and just kind of give an evaluation. How does the tree look overall? It has a full crown on the tree. I don't see any large pieces of dead wood. I don't see any of the bark, like we just talked about, peeling off. I look at this here as a very important aspect of the tree. This here is known as the root flare. And a lot of people don't know that this part of the tree is actually responsible for a lot of respiration. So you'll see sometimes trees that are planted too low, this entire portion of the tree will be buried. When you look at trees in nature, you'll see this root flare. Trees that are planted too low, it looks more like a telephone pole, like the soil line will be up here. It'll be look a straight shot, and that tells me that the tree is planted too low. So I don't see any fruiting structures, I don't see any conchs, any mushrooms. That would indication of root rot. So that's the first thing that I look at, root rot. General characteristic, I don't see any large holes, I don't see any
and when you said it has a full crown, you're basically referring to the fact that all of the branches up there seem to be kind of growing
exactly,
just naturally and abundantly.
Exactly. I don't see any one-sided. If the tree was completely one-sided, maybe it had a big storm piece broken up. Now we could run into some issues about maybe the tree's not stable. So it has a nice balanced crown all the way around. I don't see any large holes or cavities. And so first thing that I'll do is just kind of give it an overall evaluation, and then I'll measure the tree. So I take this out. This here is a DBH tape. On one side, it has a standard measuring tape. And the other side, it gives everything in DBH. DBH is the standard way that we measure trees in the green thumb industry, and it stands for diameter at breast height. So you walk up to the tree at about 4.5 feet, you measure the tree. So I'll just simply measure the tree around. And this tree is 14 inches, DBH. If you don't have a DBH tape, you could measure it with your standard tape and divide by pi, 3.14. And that'll give you DBH. So I would go back to the office, put into our system what type of tree. So this is a yellowwood, which is a great urban tolerant tree. The condition is really good. I would put that's 14-inch DBH. That way it gives the crew an idea of how big the tree is. Overall, it looks well. And what can we do about it? So for instance,
Can I interrupt you just
Sure.
for a second, Tim? So before, when we were talking about the tree inventory, and you were saying that there could be poor, fair, or good.
okay,
Which category would this tree fit
I would
in?
put this in good.
Okay.
Like I said, I don't see anything going on with the root flare. It's not buried. It's not one-sided, full crown. I don't see any holes, large cavities. It's pretty well balanced. I would say it's good.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. So for instance, with the urban forest, we also have flora and fauna. You know, sometimes it's good, sometimes not so good. For instance, if this is a resident and they were having squirrel problems, critters get into people's houses and it can be destructive. So my recommendation with this tree would be to prune back the canopy away from the house. Provide some clearance so it would make it more difficult for the squirrels to be getting up into the eaves, maybe into the attic. So again, I would come back to the office, what type of tree, the size, general condition, and I would put in a request for a pruning. Prune back the canopy away from the building to provide clearance. I'd respond to the resident, let them know what we're going to do, and then I'd respond to our forestry department in town, and then that would go to the supervisor, and the supervisor there will make arrangements for the crew to go out and respond to that request.
Okay. So let me ask. Here we
Sure.
are in Whittemore Park. It's called Whittemore Park.
Right.
We're also in the center of Arlington. I'm confused about, is this a public tree or not?
Okay, so technically, yes, this is a public tree, but because it's in a little parcel of land, the Parks Commissioner would have jurisdiction over this parcel of land because it is, I guess, technically a park. But I would work side by side with the commissioner. We could come out, look at the tree, come up with a game plan. This is what we can do, this is what we can't do, and respond accordingly.
Okay, so just to reiterate one last time then, that means that for you as the tree warden, for people doing a tree inventory, the trees really are the trees that are right along
Exactly.
the roads.
Exactly, right on the roads, and typically in between the curb and in the grass strip. Those are the trees that we're inventorying. Maybe down the future we will have an opportunity to inventory our trees in our parks and our schools, but right now we're just concentrated on the street trees themselves.
Okay. So Tim, I would imagine that folks who are watching and learning about the trees around them, through our conversation with you today, some of them might be more interested than they were before, and maybe even want to help, want to donate to a fund to make sure
Sure.
that the trees stay healthy, etc. How would they do that, or
Sure.
is there an option?
There is. In town we have Trees Please, and Trees Please is an opportunity for residents to donate. Some, they don't have time to actually get out and maybe get involved physically, or they just can't for whatever reason. But there is a section they can go on the Arlington Town website and donate into our Trees Please fund, and that money will be used to replant and reforest Arlington.
That's great. So people have that option if they can't get out there and do the inventory or something like that, or it just doesn't work for them. There's nonetheless a way for them
Exactly.
to contribute.
There's a way for anybody and everybody to help out and just to improve the overall quality of their community, of our community.
This has been a very comprehensive look at the work that you do and the issues and the glories of Arlington trees. We really appreciate your taking the time to join us today.
Well, fantastic. I
And
really appreciate it.
We will be back to continue this conversation, perhaps at the next change of seasons,
Sure.
or at another opportunity. We would love to come back and talk to you some more.
Fantastic. Sounds great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it
Thank you.
As well. So on behalf of our tree warden, Tim Lecuivre, I'm James Milan for Talk of the Town. Glad for you to join us today. Hope you had a good time. I did. Take care. See you next time.